I mentioned last week that if I ever were to go back to study an academic field, I would want to do it in a paper in the etymology of informal settlement names in Cape Town in South Africa. I've often wondered how a particular informal settlement got their names, and many of them are named after events which were relevant at the time that they were established. Also, there are many informal settlements named after people with a certain undertone of sarcasm, like Joe Slovo. Joe Slovo, the first Minister of Housing in South Africa, the Joe Slovo informal settlement being named after him. Last week, there was a fire that killed 2 people in the Ramaphosa informal settlement in Philippi. I think there's a certain dishonor in having an informal settlement named after you, just looking at the squalor that many people are forced to live in. But Kosovo, Marikana, Kiewit, there's Barcelona. There are few which are named after world and news events. So I thought, who could we speak to talk about this? And Dr. Divine Fuh, who is a director of the Institute for Humanities in Africa at UCT. Thanks so much for joining us. Is this a uniquely South African phenomenon where informal settlements are named after people and, more interestingly, after world events?
Good morning, Lester, and your team, and also your listeners, and thank you for the invitation. This is not uniquely South African. I think across the world, the naming of places or streets after events and as a way to archive particular moments is a practice that is global. So this is not new. This is common practice.
I can think of Barcelona informal settlement starting at around 1992. What was in 1992 in Barcelona? The Barcelona Games. Kosovo informal settlement started in and around 1998. What happened in Kosovo in 1998 was the Kosovo War. There seems to be, and it speaks to this real appreciation for not only what happens locally, but also what happens globally. The Marikana, there are several Marikana informal settlements around the country, started in around the time of the Marikana massacre. When was it? 2013, if I can recall. So there's a deep appreciation from even residents of informal settlements of what happens in and around this country and the world, Divine.
Yes, I think it's not just with residents of informal settlements. I think it's everyone outside of that space. Remember, Cape Town is called used to be called the Cape of Storms, for example. You know, it archives the storms. So it's a way of memorializing. It's a way of writing. It's just a way of archiving. I think we have become too accustomed to text, to written text as a way of archiving, but this naming is a particular way of archiving history, and it's common to everyone, not just in informal settlements, in wealthy areas, but also across the world.
But particularly in informal settlements, look, and maybe there is this undertone of sarcasm, informal settlements named after political figures and entities. As I said, there's a Joe Slovo informal settlement. There's a Ramaphosa informal settlement. Out in the Lotus River, Grassy Park, Parkwood area, there's a Zilla Rain informal settlement named after was then Cape Town Mayor Helen Zille. I don't know if I take it as any particular honor if people are living in dire, underdeveloped circumstances have somewhat dishonored me by naming the real squalor in which they live after me, Divine. I'm sure it should give some impetus to political leaders. Cyril Ramaphosa should do everything that he can. That the place that's named after him should be at least be developed to some sort of acceptable standards.
I think that when the name is given is to archive the particular circumstances during that time. I remember the informal settlement Ramaphosa in Cape Town. There are two. There's one in Ekululeni and there's one in Cape Town. So the one in Cape Town is named in 2018 on the same day that Ramaphosa is being installed as president of the country, you know. So it's just to archive that moment. Of course, it's unfortunate that it's in difficult circumstances. But remember that once you use the term informal settlement, you're actually talking about residential areas that have not been zoned and also that do not have the authority, have not been approved or authorized, for settlement. So it already means that, you're not going to have services, you're not going to have the city, to provide enough resources. So it's quite unfortunate, but it's not just on Ramaphosa, it's on all of us to live in a country where there's so much divide. It's everyone's concern. Yeah.
Professor Divine Fuh, really appreciate your time. Director for the Institute for Humanities in Cape Town.